The laughter in courtroom 4B wasn't subtle. It was cruel, echoing off the mahogany walls like a slap in the face. Palmer Walsh adjusted his $3,000 silk tie, smirking at the woman sitting across the aisle in a faded thrift store cardigan. He thought he had already won. He thought he was divorcing a helpless, penniless housewife who would be lucky to walk away with a used car. He had no idea that the woman he had spent 5 years mocking wasn't just looking for alimony. She was looking for a hostile takeover. When the judge asked for her financial statement, nobody in that room was prepared for the name that was about to drop, or the billions attached to it. Rain lashed against the tall, arched windows of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse in Manhattan, casting a grey, dreary light over the proceedings. Inside, the atmosphere was stiflingly hot, smelling of floor wax and expensive cologne. Ellsworth sat with her hands folded in her lap, her knuckles white. She wore a simple grey dress that had seen better days, and her hair was pulled back in a messy, unassuming bun. To anyone glancing at her, she looked exactly like what her husband's lawyer was describing, tired, defeated, and irrelevant. "Your Honor," Arthur Penhaligon boomed. Arthur was Palmer's lawyer, a man known in New York legal circles as the Shark of Wall Street. He paced before the bench, gesturing theatrically at Ellsworth. "We are wasting the court's valuable time. My client, Mr. Walsh, has been more than generous. He has offered Ms. Sinclair a settlement of $50,000. For a woman who has not contributed a single dollar to the household finances in 5 years, who spent her days painting in a studio paid for by my client. This is charity." Palmer Walsh leaned back in his leather chair, suppressing a chuckle. He was a handsome man, in that polished, manufactured way that money buys. As the CFO of Vertex Dynamics, a rising tech logistics firm, he was used to crushing competitors. He looked at Ellsworth with a mixture of pity and disgust. "She doesn't need half my assets, Arthur," Palmer whispered, loud enough for the stenographer to hear. "She wouldn't know how to manage a checking account, let alone a portfolio." Judge Harold Calloway, a stern man with thick spectacles and very little patience for theatrics, peered over the rim of his glasses. "Ms. Sinclair," the judge said, his voice gravelly, "your counsel has remained remarkably silent during Mr. Penhaligon's opening remarks. Do you intend to contest the prenuptial agreement?" Ellsworth didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the table. Beside her sat her lawyer, a man named Lucas. Unlike the flashy Arthur Penhaligon, Lucas wore an off-the-rack suit that fit poorly. He looked more like a tired public defender than a high-stakes divorce attorney. He had spent the last 20 minutes doodling on a legal pad. "We do, Your Honor," Lucas said softly, finally standing up. He didn't boom, he didn't pace, he just stood there, looking bored. Arthur Penhaligon laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. "Contest it? On what grounds? Mr. Walsh is a self-made executive. Ms. Sinclair is a housewife who claims to be an artist. The prenup is ironclad. She leaves with what she came in with. Nothing." Palmer leaned over to his lawyer. "Wrap this up, Arthur. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin with Lydia. She's waiting." Lydia. The name stung Ellsworth, though she didn't show it. Lydia was Palmer's executive assistant, a 24-year-old blonde who had been wearing Ellsworth's jewelry before Ellsworth had even moved out of the penthouse. Palmer hadn't just cheated, he had paraded his infidelity around New York like a trophy. "Ms. Sinclair," the judge sighed, checking his watch. "If you are looking for sympathy, this is a court of law, not a therapy session. Mr. Walsh is a high-net-worth individual. His forensic accountants have provided a full disclosure of his assets. Unless you can prove he is hiding funds, I am inclined to rule in favor of the existing prenup." "We aren't asking for Mr. Walsh's money, Your Honor," Lucas said, finally looking up from his notepad. He adjusted his glasses. We are simply asking for a clarification of ownership regarding vertex dynamics. Palmer froze. The smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. Ownership. I own 10% of the company shares. The rest is owned by a private holding company in Zurich. What does that have to do with her? Everything. Ellsworth spoke for the first time. Her voice wasn't shaky. It was cold, clear. It cut through the room like a razor blade. She slowly lifted her head. The tired, defeated look was gone. Her eyes, usually soft and warm, were now hard as flint. She reached up and pulled the pin from her hair, letting it fall in waves around her shoulders. She took off the oversized glasses she didn't actually need. Arthur, Ellsworth said, addressing the opposing lawyer directly, ignoring protocol. You called me a charity case. You said I contributed nothing. And I stand by it, Arthur sneered, though he took a half step back, unnerved by the sudden shift in her demeanor. You also mentioned that Palmer is a self-made man, Ellsworth continued, standing up. She smoothed the wrinkles of her cheap dress with a slow, deliberate motion. But that's the funny thing about self-made men in this city, Palmer. They usually forget who bought the bricks they built their castle with. Sit down, Ellsworth, Palmer snapped, his face reddening. Stop embarrassing yourself. Lucas, Ellsworth said, extending her hand. The blue folder, please. The room went silent. There was something about the way she commanded her lawyer, not like a client asking a favor, but like a CEO commanding a subordinate, that made the air in the room change pressure. Lucas opened his battered briefcase and pulled out a thick, navy blue binder. He slid it across the table to the judge. Exhibit A, Lucas announced, corporate restructuring documents for Vertex Dynamics, dated 5 years ago, just 2 months before Mr. Walsh and Ms. Sinclair were married. Judge Calloway opened the folder. He frowned, flipping a page, then another. He looked up at Palmer, then back at the documents. Mr. Walsh, you listed your primary creditor as Aurelius Ventures? Yes, Your Honor, Palmer said, straightening his tie, though sweat was beginning to bead on his forehead. It's a private equity firm based in Singapore. They hold the debt for the company's initial expansion. It's standard business. I pay them interest every quarter. It has nothing to do with my personal marital assets. And who is the signatory for Aurelius Ventures? The judge asked. I believe it's a proxy, Palmer said dismissively. Some lawyer in the Caymans. I deal with their board via email. Actually, Ellsworth interrupted, you deal with me. A ripple of confusion went through the courtroom. Arthur Penhaligon slammed his hand on the table. Objection, Your Honor. The plaintiff is delusional. She paints watercolors of stray cats. She does not run a Singaporean equity firm. Lucas, the second document, Ellsworth said calmly. Lucas slid a single sheet of paper forward. It was a bank transfer receipt. This is the initial seed funding for Vertex Dynamics, Lucas narrated. $12 million, transferred from an account at Credit Suisse. The account holder is Ellsworth Sinclair. Palmer stood up so fast his chair tipped over with a loud crash. That's a forgery. She doesn't have that kind of money. Her father was a mechanic from Queens. My father was a mechanic, Ellsworth agreed, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. But my mother? You never asked about my mother, did you, Palmer? You were too busy talking about yourself. Ellsworth walked out from behind the table. She moved differently now. The slouch was gone. She walked with the predatory grace of a panther. My mother was Catherine Vane, the sole heiress to the Vane shipping empire. The colour drained from Arthur Penhaligon's face. Vane shipping, he whispered. That's old money. Industrial Revolution money. When she died, I inherited everything, Ellsworth said, stopping right in front of Palmer. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she seemed to tower over him. I didn't want the fame. I didn't want the fake friends. So I used my mother's maiden name, Sinclair. I wanted to find someone who loved me for me, not for the billions in my trust fund. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. And then I met you, Palmer. You were charming, ambitious, but you were drowning in debt. Vertex was about to go under before it even launched. You, Palmer stammered, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. You paid the debt? I bought the debt, Ellsworth corrected him sharply. I am Aurelius Ventures. I own your loans, Palmer. I own the building your office is in. I own the lease on the corporate jet you take Lydia to Cabo in. And do you know what the best part is? She turned to the judge, smiling sweetly. There is a clause in the loan agreement. Clause 14b. In the event of moral turpitude or public scandal involving the acting CEO, the primary lender reserves the right to call in the full value of the loan immediately. Ellsworth checked her nails, looking bored. Cheating on your wife with your secretary? I'd call that a scandal. And since you don't have the $40 million to pay me back right now? She leaned in close to Palmer, whispering so only he could hear. I own you. Pandemonium broke out in the courtroom. Judge Calloway banged his gavel with such force that the sound cracked through the chaotic murmurs like a gunshot. Order! Order in this court! The judge bellowed, his face flushed. Mr. Penhaligon, control your client before I hold him in contempt. Arthur Penhaligon was trying, but Palmer Walsh looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He was gripping the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles white, staring at Ellsworth as if she had grown a second head. This is entrapment, Arthur shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Ellsworth. Your Honor, this is clearly a setup. Ms. Sinclair, or whatever she calls herself, lured my client into financial dependency under false pretenses. This is marital fraud. On the contrary, Lucas, Ellsworth's lawyer, replied calmly, not even looking up from his files. Mr. Walsh sought out Aurelius Ventures 5 years ago. He pitched them. He signed the documents. He accepted the $12 million. The fact that he didn't perform due diligence to find out who the principal investor was? That is not fraud, Mr. Penhaligon. That is incompetence. The judge rubbed his temples. I am calling a recess. 30 minutes. Counsel, I want to see you in my chambers. Mr. Walsh, if you scream in my courtroom one more time, you will spend the night in a cell. As the bailiff ushered the crowd out, Ellsworth stood up gracefully. She didn't look at Palmer. She simply turned and walked toward the heavy double doors. Palmer scrambled after her, ignoring his lawyer's hissed warnings. He caught up to her in the wide marble corridor of the courthouse. The hallway was crowded with other litigants, lawyers and onlookers, but Palmer didn't care. Ellsworth, he shouted, grabbing her arm. Ellsworth stopped. She looked down at his hand on her arm, then up at his eyes. Her expression was one of mild distaste, as if a stray dog had just jumped on her clean coat. Remove your hand, Palmer, she said softly, before I add assault to your list of problems. Palmer recoiled, but his anger was vibrating off him in waves. Who do you think you are? You played the role of the pathetic, do-nothing wife for 5 years. You let me pay the mortgage. You let me buy you that cheap car. I let you feel like a man, Palmer, Ellsworth said, her voice dropping to a chilly whisper. I knew how fragile your ego was. I wanted to see if you could build something on your own. I wanted to see if you had integrity. She tilted her head. You failed. Spectacularly. Just then, The sound of clicking heels echoed down the corridor. A young woman with platinum blonde hair, wearing a tight red dress that was entirely inappropriate for a courthouse, came strutting toward them. It was Lydia. "Palmer, baby," Lydia chirped, oblivious to the tension radiating from the group. She glared at Ellsworth. "Why is this dragging on? Did you get her to sign the papers yet? We have that reservation." Palmer looked at his mistress, and for the first time, he didn't see a trophy. He saw a liability. "Lydia, shut up," he snapped. Lydia blinked, stunned. "Excuse me? You told me she was going to be crying in the gutter by noon. Why is she still standing here looking like that?" Lydia gestured vaguely at Ellsworth's sudden aura of confidence. Ellsworth turned to Lydia. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. "Hello, Lydia. I see you're wearing the emerald earrings from my grandmother's collection, the ones missing from my jewelry box." Lydia instinctively covered her ears, stepping back. "Palmer gave them to me. They're mine now." "Actually," Ellsworth said, checking an invisible watch on her wrist, "those earrings are insured for $200,000. Since they were taken without my permission, that's technically grand larceny. But I'm feeling generous today. You can keep them." Lydia smirked triumphantly. "See? She's weak." "I'm letting you keep them," Ellsworth continued, stepping closer to the mistress, "because you're going to need something to pawn when Palmer loses his job. Unemployment doesn't pay for Prada, darling." "Job?" Lydia laughed. "He's the CEO. He owns the company." "Not as of 10 minutes ago," Ellsworth said. She turned back to Palmer. "You see, Palmer, calling in the loan is just step one, but you forgot about Clause 17C in our shareholder agreement. In the event of default, the primary lender has the option to convert debt into equity at a discounted rate." Palmer's face went grey. "No, you can't. That would give you 51%, Ellsworth finished. "I don't just own your debt, Palmer. I own Vertex Dynamics. I am the majority shareholder, and I've already called an emergency board meeting for 2:00 p.m. She brushed a piece of lint off his lapel. "Don't be late. We're discussing your termination." The headquarters of Vertex Dynamics was a glass and steel monolith in the financial district, a testament to Palmer Walsh's vanity. The lobby was adorned with massive abstract sculptures and a waterfall. At 1:45 p.m., Palmer Walsh burst through the revolving doors, sweating and disheveled. Arthur Penhaligon trailed behind him, looking equally rattled. "You have to stop this, Arthur," Palmer hissed as they power-walked toward the elevators. "File an injunction. Stop the meeting." "I can't stop a majority shareholder meeting, Palmer," Arthur argued, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "She has the controlling interest. If the paperwork she showed in court is real, she can legally fire you and replace the entire board if she wants to." "She's bluffing," Palmer muttered, jamming his thumb against the elevator button. "She's a painter. She doesn't know how to run a logistics tech firm. The board will eat her alive. They respect me. I made them millions." The elevator dinged, and they ascended to the 40th floor. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was wrong. Usually, the executive floor was buzzing with activity, assistants running phones, analysts shouting across desks. Today, it was silent, deadly silent. The staff were huddled in small groups, whispering. When they saw Palmer, they stopped talking and looked down, avoiding eye contact. "What is going on?" Palmer barked at his secretary, a terrified young man named Kevin. "Why isn't anyone working?" They're watching the live stream, sir," Kevin stammered. "What live stream?" Kevin pointed to the large monitor mounted on the wall of the waiting area. It was broadcasting a feed from inside the main conference room. Sitting at the head of the table, Palmer's seat, was Ellsworth. She had changed. Gone was the grey dress. She was now wearing a tailored white suit that screamed power. Her hair was slicked back, and she was speaking to the board of directors with a calm, terrifying authority. Palmer stormed toward the conference room doors and threw them open. "Get out of my chair!" he screamed. The room fell silent. Around the long glass table sat 7 of the most powerful business people in the city. They were the members of the board, people Palmer had wined and dined for years, people he thought were his friends. None of them looked at him. They were all looking at Ellsworth. "You're late, Palmer," Ellsworth said, not even flinching. She tapped a tablet in front of her. "We were just reviewing the quarterly audits. Fascinating reading." "Security!" Palmer yelled into the hallway. "Remove this woman from the building." 2 large security guards appeared in the doorway. Palmer pointed at Ellsworth. "Get her out. She's trespassing." The guards looked at Palmer. Then they looked at Ellsworth. Ellsworth gave a small nod. The guard stepped forward and grabbed Palmer by the arms. "What are you doing?" Palmer shrieked, struggling against their grip. "I pay your salaries. I am the CEO." "Actually," said a deep voice from the side of the room. Palmer froze. Sitting in the corner was a man he recognized all too well. It was Victor Strathmore, a corporate shark known for dismantling companies. But Victor wasn't there to destroy Vertex. He was sitting next to Ellsworth, taking notes. "According to the minutes of the meeting we just concluded," Victor said, his voice like gravel, "Ms. Sinclair has voted her majority shares to restructure the executive team. You were terminated for cause, effective immediately." "For cause?" Palmer spat. "Because of a divorce? You can't do that." Ellsworth stood up. She picked up a remote control and pointed it at the projection screen on the wall. "Not because of the divorce, Palmer," she said. "Because of this." The screen flickered to life. It displayed a complex web of bank transfers. "Project Chimera," Ellsworth read from the screen. "A shell company set up in the Bahamas. Over the last 3 years, you have siphoned off $4 million of company funds into this account. You listed it as consulting fees. But there is no consultant, is there?" The room gasped. The board members began murmuring angrily. That's a lie," Palmer stammered, but the fight was draining out of him. "I have the IP logs," Ellsworth said relentlessly. "You accessed the account from your home computer. You used the company's own money to buy Lydia that apartment in Soho. You used my money to pay for your mistress." She slammed her hand down on the table, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. "That is embezzlement, Palmer. That is a federal crime. I'm not just firing you. I'm handing this entire file to the district attorney." Palmer's knees gave out. The security guards held him up, dragging him back toward the door. "Ellsworth, wait," Palmer begged, tears streaming down his face now, his dignity completely gone. "Please, we can talk about this. I'm your husband." "Ex-husband," Ellsworth corrected. "And don't worry about the lawyer fees. I'm sure the court-appointed defender is very nice." She waved her hand, dismissing him. "Get him out of my sight." As Palmer was dragged screaming down the hallway of the company he built, Ellsworth sat back down in the leather chair. She looked around the table at the stunned board members. "Now," she said, smoothing her lapel, "let's discuss the future of Vertex. I have some ideas about efficiency." 3 weeks later, the view from Palmer Walsh's life had changed drastically. He was no longer looking out of a penthouse window overlooking Central Park. Instead, he was staring at a cracked plaster wall in a motel room in Queens, the neon sign outside buzzing with an irritating, rhythmic hum. The district attorney had frozen his personal accounts pending the embezzlement investigation. He was out on bail, thanks to his parents mortgaging their retirement home in Florida, a fact that made him feel more angry than guilty. Lydia was sitting on the edge of the sagging bed, filing her nails. The emerald earrings were gone. She had sold them 2 days ago just to pay for a rental car. "Stop pacing, Palmer," Lydia snapped, blowing on her nails. "You're making me dizzy, and you smell like cheap scotch." Palmer stopped and glared at her. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. "I'm thinking, Lydia. Unlike you, I'm trying to find a way out of this hellhole." "There is no way out," Lydia muttered. "Ellsworth has the best lawyers in the city. You're going to jail, and I'm going to be working at a diner. This isn't what I signed up for." "She thinks she's so smart," Palmer whispered, ignoring her. He walked over to his battered briefcase and pulled out a small, silver USB drive. He held it up to the light like a holy relic. "She thinks taking the company, firing me, and humiliating me was the end. But she forgot who built the infrastructure of Vertex. She forgot that I wrote the original code for the routing algorithms." Lydia looked up, uninterested. "So? You're locked out of the system. Your passwords don't work." "The front door is locked," Palmer grinned, a manic, dangerous look in his eyes. "But I built a back door, a God mode access key. I kept it just in case the board ever tried to push me out. I never thought I'd use it on Ellsworth, but..." He clenched the drive in his fist. "If I can't have the company, no one can." He grabbed his jacket. "Stay here. Where are you going?" "To meet the one man who hates the Vane family more than I do." An hour later, Palmer sat in a dim booth at the back of the Cobalt Room, an exclusive cigar bar in Midtown that he used to frequent. He felt out of place now without his platinum credit card, but the man sitting across from him didn't seem to mind his disheveled appearance. Donovan Grant was a legend in the shipping industry, and not for good reasons. He was the CEO of Ironclad Logistics, a rival firm known for hostile takeovers and cutting corners. He was a massive man with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow. "You look terrible, Walsh," Donovan said, cutting the tip off a Cuban cigar. "I saw the news. Your ex-wife really did a number on you. The Vane heiress comes out of hiding. It's quite the Cinderella story." "It's a horror story," Palmer spat, accepting the drink Donovan pushed toward him. "She doesn't know what she's doing. She's going to run the company into the ground." "Eventually. Yes," Donovan agreed, lighting his cigar. "But in the meantime, she has the Vane fortune backing her. She can afford to lose money for years. I can't compete with those pockets. She's already undercutting my prices." "I can stop her," Palmer said. Donovan raised an eyebrow. "You? You're a pariah, Palmer. You're radioactive." Palmer slid the silver USB drive across the polished wood table. "This drive contains the root access codes to the Vertex automated dispatch system," Palmer whispered. "It also contains the client list, the bid projections for the next 5 years, and the blackmail material I gathered on 3 of the board members." Donovan stared at the drive, the smoke from his cigar curling around his fingers. "And what do you want for this?" "I want $2 million in an offshore account in the Caymans," Palmer said. "And I want a ticket to Brazil. Tonight." Donovan picked up the drive, turning it over in his large fingers. "If I use this to crash her system, it looks like a cyber attack. Or better yet, incompetence." "Exactly." Palmer leaned in. "Crash the grid during the peak delivery window. Tomorrow is the launch of the MedLink contract. Vertex is shipping $10 million worth of insulin and heart medication to hospitals across the tri-state area. It's Ellsworth's big PR move to show she's a benevolent leader." Donovan smiled, and it was a cold, terrifying sight. If those drugs don't arrive, or if they arrive spoiled, the stock tanks, Palmer finished. The hospitals sue. The FDA investigates. Ellsworth is disgraced, and Ironclad steps in to save the day. Donovan slipped the drive into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. The money will be in your account in an hour. My pilot is waiting at Teterboro Airport. Get out of the country, Palmer. Because once I press enter, New York is going to burn. Ellsworth sat in the corner office that used to belong to her husband. She had completely redecorated. The dark, imposing leather and mahogany were gone, replaced by cream-colored furniture, modern art, and plenty of natural light. She was exhausted. Being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar logistics firm was harder than she had let on in court. She had spent the last 3 weeks working 18-hour days, trying to clean up the mess Palmer had left behind. Lucas knocked on the doorframe. He looked different, too. He was wearing a better suit, though his tie was still crooked. He was now her chief legal officer. "You need to eat, Ellsworth," Lucas said, placing a takeout bag from Joe's Shanghai on her desk. "And sleep. You look like you're running on fumes." Ellsworth rubbed her eyes, smiling faintly. "I can't sleep, Lucas. The Medlink shipment is tomorrow morning. This contract is everything. If we pull this off, we prove that Vertex is stable. We prove that I'm not just a socialite playing dress-up." "You've already proved that," Lucas said, sitting opposite her. "You fired the corrupt managers. You increased wages for the drivers. The employees love you." "The employees love the paycheck," Ellsworth corrected. "The press is still waiting for me to fail. Did you see the New York Post? Princess Ellsworth plays trucker. They want a disaster." "They won't get one," Lucas assured her. "The system is secure. We've triple-checked the routing." Ellsworth stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city lights. "I just have a bad feeling. Palmer is too quiet. He's out on bail, but my private investigator lost his tail on him 3 hours ago. He vanished in Queens." "He's running," Lucas shrugged. "He's a coward. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now." Before Ellsworth could respond, the red phone on her desk rang. It was the emergency line from the operations center. Ellsworth snatched it up. "Sinclair. Miss Sinclair, we have a problem." The voice of the operations manager, Sarah, crackled with panic. "A big problem. The servers just blinked." "What do you mean, blinked?" Ellsworth asked, her grip tightening on the phone. "We just lost GPS contact with the entire fleet. All 400 trucks. They've vanished from the map." Ellsworth's heart stopped. "That's impossible. We have redundant satellite backups." "The backups are down too," Sarah cried. "And, Ms. Sinclair, the temperature controls. The Medlink trucks carrying the insulin. The sensors are reporting a critical failure. The refrigeration units have been remotely shut off." "Shut them back on!" Ellsworth screamed, already running toward the door. "We can't. We're locked out. Someone has administrative control. A message just popped up on the main screen." "What does it say?" Ellsworth demanded, sprinting down the hallway with Lucas close behind her. "It says, checkmate." Ellsworth burst into the operations center. It was a scene of absolute chaos. Massive screens covered the walls, usually displaying a map of the US, with thousands of moving green dots representing their trucks. Now the screens were black, save for a single blinking skull icon in the center. Technicians were typing furiously, shouting codes to each other. "Status!" Ellsworth barked. "The trucks are driving blind," Sarah reported, her face pale. "Drivers are radioing in. Their onboard computers are malfunctioning. Some are being routed to wrong addresses. The Medlink convoy. The drivers say the AC units just died. If we don't get them back online in 2 hours, the insulin will spoil. That's millions of dollars in life-saving medicine destroyed." "This is a hack," Lucas said, staring at the screen. "A sophisticated one." "It's not just a hack," Ellsworth realized, a cold dread settling in her stomach. "It's a command. Someone has the master key. She looked at Lucas. Palmer. He doesn't have the clearance, Sarah argued. We wiped his codes. He built the system, Ellsworth said quietly. He left a back door. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to be calm. Panic would kill the company. Panic would kill patients waiting for that medicine. Kill the network, Ellsworth ordered. The room went silent. Excuse me? Sarah asked. Pull the plug, Ellsworth shouted. Disconnect the central server from the internet. Go manual. Ms. Sinclair, if we go manual, we lose all tracking. We won't know where the trucks are, a technician argued. We already don't know where they are, Ellsworth countered. But if we disconnect, the hacker can't control the refrigeration units anymore. The drivers can override the systems manually if the central command is severed. It's risky, Lucas warned. We'll be flying blind in the middle of a storm. Do it, Ellsworth commanded. The head technician ran to the main server rack against the wall and yanked the master fiber optic cable. The screens went dead. The skull icon vanished. Get on the radios, Ellsworth ordered, her voice shaking slightly but strong. Call every single driver. Tell them to switch to manual override. Tell them to check their cargo temps immediately. And tell them to drive to the nearest safe depot, not the destination. For the next 4 hours, Ellsworth didn't sit down. She paced the floor, personally taking calls from drivers, coordinating routes using physical paper maps spread out on tables. It was like a war room from the 1940s. By 6 a.m., the sun was rising over Manhattan. Report, Ellsworth said, her voice hoarse. Sarah lowered her headset. She looked exhausted, but she was smiling. We reached 98% of the fleet. The Medlink convoy managed to restart the cooling units manually. The temperature rose to 40 degrees. But it didn't cross the critical threshold. The medicine is safe. A cheer went up in the room. People were hugging each other. Lucas squeezed Ellsworth's shoulder. You did it. You saved it. Ellsworth didn't smile. She was staring at the blank screen. We survived, Ellsworth whispered. But this wasn't just Palmer. He's not smart enough to coordinate a simultaneous attack on the firewall while hiding from the police. He had help. She turned to Lucas. Get the forensic IT team in here. I want to know where that signal came from. And get the private investigator back on the line. What are you going to do? Lucas asked. Ellsworth's eyes were cold, reminiscent of the moment she revealed her identity in court. I'm done playing defense, Lucas. Palmer tried to burn my house down. Now I'm going to find out who gave him the matches. Just then, her cell phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Ellsworth answered it. Speak. You're resilient, I'll give you that. A deep, unfamiliar voice rumbled. It was Donovan Grant, though she didn't know it yet. But you can't run a logistics company on paper maps forever, Ellsworth. The world is moving forward, and you're in the way. Who is this? Ellsworth demanded. Consider this a warning shot, the voice said. Cell Vertex. Walk away. Go back to painting your watercolors. If you don't, next time I won't target the trucks. I'll target you. The line went dead. Ellsworth slowly lowered the phone. Who was it? Lucas asked. The real enemy, Ellsworth said. She grabbed her coat. Lucas, call the helicopter. We're going to Teterboro. Why? Because, Ellsworth said, buttoning her coat. My investigator said he lost Palmer near the airport. If Palmer is trying to run, he's going to use a private charter. And I know exactly which hangar services the shady flights. Ellsworth, this is dangerous. Let the police handle it. The police are too slow, Ellsworth said, opening the door. Palmer has my codes. As long as he has that drive, he can destroy us. I'm going to get it back. The wind at Teterboro Airport was vicious. a physical force that seemed determined to push Ellsworth back. It whipped across the grey expanse of the tarmac, stinging her cheeks and tearing at the hem of her coat. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of a storm that had been brewing all afternoon, a mirror of the tempest inside her. Ellsworth gripped the handle of the black SUV as Lucas navigated the security checkpoint, the vehicle swaying slightly under the gusts. They were driving fast, faster than was safe, but safety had been a secondary concern since the moment that phone call ended. "We're almost at Hangar 4, Lucas said, his voice tight. He was white-knuckled on the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. "Ellsworth, are you sure about this? We can still wait for the tactical team. They're 5 minutes out." "5 minutes is a lifetime, Lucas," Ellsworth replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon of the airfield. "In 5 minutes, that plane will be taxiing. In 10, it will be in international airspace. Once they leave the ground, the data is gone. My company, my employees' livelihoods, the patients waiting for those medicines, it all disappears with them." She saw it then, a sleek, silver bird of prey resting on the wet asphalt. The Gulfstream GO-150 was idling, its turbines screaming a high-pitched whine that vibrated in her chest even through the car's insulated glass. It was a machine built for escape, for luxury, for people who believed the rules of gravity and law didn't apply to them. Two figures stood at the base of the metal stairs, silhouetted against the harsh floodlights of the hangar. One was hunched, frantic, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, Palmer. The other was imposing, standing with the stillness of a predator, Donovan Grant. Lucas screeched the SUV to a halt 50 yards from the jet, the tires skidding on the damp pavement. Before the car had even fully stopped, Ellsworth threw the door open. "Ellsworth! Wait!" Lucas yelled, unbuckling his seatbelt. "Stay with the car, Lucas!" she shouted back, her voice nearly swallowed by the roar of the jet engines. "I need you ready to block the runway if they try to move." She stepped out onto the tarmac. The noise was deafening, a wall of sound that made thinking difficult. The smell of jet fuel was thick and oily, coating her throat. She began to walk, then run. Her heels clicked sharply against the pavement, a rhythmic staccato of determination. Every step sent a jolt of pain up her legs, but she didn't slow down. She had spent 5 years walking on eggshells around Palmer, shrinking herself to fit into the small box he had built for her. She wasn't shrinking anymore. Palmer saw her first. He turned, his face a mask of ghostly pallor under the industrial lights. He looked disheveled, his expensive suit rumpled, his tie loose. He grabbed Donovan's arm, pointing a shaking finger at her. "She's here! You said she wouldn't find us!" Palmer screamed. The wind carried his voice to her, thin and reedy. Donovan Grant didn't flinch. He looked at Ellsworth, then back at the pilot waiting at the top of the stairs. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, like a man whose dinner reservation had been slightly delayed. Ellsworth stopped 10 feet away from them, her chest heaving, her hair whipping around her face. She stood tall, refusing to let them see her catch her breath. "Get on the plane, Walsh!" Donovan barked, his voice a deep rumble that cut through the engine noise. "We're leaving. Give me the drive." "Not until I see the transfer," Palmer shouted, clutching a small silver USB drive to his chest with both hands. It was pathetic, really. He held on to that piece of plastic like it was a holy relic, his only salvation in a world that was rapidly collapsing around him. "I checked the account on my phone. The balance is 0. You didn't pay me." Donovan stepped closer, his large frame towering over the ex-husband. The sheer physical difference between them was stark. Donovan was a monolith of brute force and corporate malice, while Palmer was a crumbling facade of unearned arrogance. "The money is in escrow," Donovan lied. It was a lazy lie, one he didn't even bother to dress up. "You get it when we land in Brazil. Now give me the drive." "No." Palmer backed away, his shoes slipping slightly on the wet tarmac. "I know how you work, Donovan. I know about the Horizon merger. The CFO disappeared 2 days after signing. Once you have the codes, you'll dump me in the Amazon. I want the money now." "Gentlemen," Ellsworth's voice cut through their argument. She projected it from her diaphragm, clear and icy. Both men turned. "Ellsworth," Palmer stammered. He looked at her, and for a second she saw a flicker of the man she had once thought she loved, but it was buried under layers of fear and greed. "Go away. You took everything from me. This is my severance package." He waved the drive at her, his hand trembling violently. "It's not a severance package, Palmer," Ellsworth said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. "It's a death sentence." Donovan narrowed his eyes, his jaw tightening. He didn't like being interrupted. "Do you really think Donovan Grant is going to let you live?" Ellsworth continued, her eyes locking onto Palmer's. She ignored Donovan completely, focusing all her energy on the weak link. "Think, Palmer. You're the only witness to his corporate sabotage. You're the liability. Once he has those codes, once he has control of Vertex, what use are you?" She took another step. The wind howled around them. "Look at him," she commanded. "He's not your partner. He's not your savior. He's a shark, and you're just the chum he threw in the water to distract me." "Shut up," Palmer yelled, sweat dripping down his face, despite the biting cold. "You're just jealous. I beat you. I crashed your system. I brought the vain heiress to her knees." "And we stood back up," Ellsworth lied smoothly. Her face betrayed nothing. "The trucks are running, Palmer. The medicine was delivered an hour ago. We went manual. We bypassed your God mode. You failed. It was a gamble. If Palmer knew the technical specifics, he would know she was bluffing. But Palmer had always been an idea man, never one for the gritty details. You fixed it?" Palmer's shoulders slumped. The manic energy drained out of him, replaced by a crushing realization. "Then, what is this for?" He looked at the drive. "If the system is fixed, this is worthless." Donovan laughed. It was a low, cruel sound that made Ellsworth's skin crawl. He clapped his hand slowly, mockingly. "Bravo, Miss Sinclair. A valiant bluff, truly." Donovan stepped between them, blocking Palmer from her view. "But we both know that without that drive, you can't patch the security hole I exploited. You might be running on paper maps and prayers right now, but I can shut you down again tomorrow, and the day after that. I can bleed you dry until Vertex is nothing but a memory." Donovan turned back to Palmer, his patience evaporating. He extended a large, calloused hand. "Last chance, Walsh. The drive. Or I leave you here for the police. And trust me, the federal prison sentences for cyber-terrorism are not short." Palmer looked frantically from Donovan to Ellsworth. He was trapped. On one side, the man who promised him freedom but exuded menace. On the other, the woman he had scorned, who now looked at him with a pity that hurt worse than her anger. "He's going to kill me," Palmer whispered, the reality finally sinking in. He looked at the dark, open door of the plane. It didn't look like an escape anymore. It looked like a coffin. "Yes," Ellsworth said softly. "He is." Palmer looked down at the silver USB drive. It contained everything: his revenge, his leverage, his future. But in Donovan's hands, it was just the weapon that would be used to execute him. A spasm of spite crossed Palmer's face. If he was going down, he wasn't going to let the man who played him win. "You want it?" Palmer shrieked, his voice cracking. "Fetch!" With a sudden, violent motion, He wound up his arm and threw the drive. He didn't throw it to Donovan. He didn't throw it to Ellsworth. He hurled it sideways, out toward the active runway. The small silver device glinted in the floodlights before splashing into a murky puddle of oil, rainwater, and runway grime. "No!" Donovan roared. The sound was animalistic. He lunged for the drive, abandoning all dignity. The billionaire CEO scrambled on the wet tarmac, his expensive Italian coat soaking up the filth as he clawed at the puddle. Palmer didn't wait. He turned and ran. But he didn't run toward the plane. He ran toward the only person in the world he knew wouldn't kill him. He collapsed at Ellsworth's feet, grabbing the hem of her coat, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Just don't let him take me. Please, Ellsworth. Please." Ellsworth looked down at him. She felt a distant pang of sadness, not for him, but for the years she had wasted believing he was a good man. She didn't pull away, but she didn't touch him either. Donovan retrieved the drive. He stood up, water dripping from his hands, his face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He wiped the device on his sleeve, checking it frantically. "You idiot," he growled, glaring at Palmer. Then he turned his gaze to Ellsworth. It was a look of lethal promise. "This isn't over, Sinclair. You think a little water stops me? I have the best data recovery teams in the world. I have resources you can't even dream of. I will bury you." Donovan turned to board the plane, clutching the wet drive. "Pilot, get us in the air. Now!" "Mr. Grant!" The voice was amplified, booming from the darkness beyond the hangar lights like the voice of God. Before Donovan could take the first step up the stairs, the world turned white. Floodlights from every direction snapped on, blinding everyone on the tarmac. 4 NYPD cruisers and 2 unmarked FBI SUVs swerved out from behind the hangar structures, their tires screeching as they cut off the path of the jet. The red and blue strobe lights painted the wet tarmac in a chaotic dance of color. Sirens wailed, a rising cacophony that drowned out the jet engines. Officers in tactical gear poured out of the vehicles, weapons drawn and leveled. "Federal agents! Drop the weapon! Hands in the air! Do it now!" Donovan froze on the stairs. For a second, he looked like he might run for the cabin door, but he saw the sniper lasers dancing on his chest. He slowly turned back around. He looked at the police, then at the USB drive in his hand. "It's not a weapon," Donovan shouted, his voice cracking slightly as he raised his hands. "It's just a storage device. I found it on the ground. I was returning it." Lucas stepped out of the lead police car. He walked calmly through the chaos, flanking Ellsworth. He looked at the scene, Palmer weeping on the ground, Donovan held at gunpoint, and adjusted his glasses. "We'll let the forensics lab decide that," Lucas called out. "And we'll let the jury listen to the recording of the phone call you made to Ellsworth's office this morning, the one where you threatened her life. That moves this from corporate espionage to extortion and conspiracy to commit murder." Donovan's face fell. The color drained away, leaving him looking old and grey. He looked at Ellsworth, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You recorded it?" he whispered. Ellsworth reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She held it up, the screen glowing in the night. "I record everything, Donovan," she said, her voice cutting through the wind. "It's a habit I picked up from living with a liar." She glanced down at Palmer, who was now being hauled to his feet by a grim-faced officer. "You two have more in common than you think." Donovan Grant, the titan of industry, the untouchable billionaire who treated the world as his chessboard, was forced to his knees. The wet asphalt soaked into his pants. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, the sound was final. He stared at Ellsworth with pure, distilled hatred. "You're making a mistake," Donovan spat as they dragged him toward the squad car. "You don't know who I am. I can buy and sell this entire precinct." "I know exactly who you are," Ellsworth said. She watched as an evidence technician carefully bagged the wet USB drive. "You're the man who underestimated a housewife." She turned away from him, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She felt light. The weight that had been pressing on her chest for months, the fear, the doubt, the need to prove herself, was lifting. "Lucas," she said, her voice steady, "make sure the police get the logs from the server. I want this airtight. No loopholes." "Consider it done," Lucas said. He was watching Palmer. Palmer was being shoved into the back of a squad car. He looked small, broken. The arrogance was gone, leaving behind only a terrified child. When he saw her watching him, he stopped resisting. He pressed his face against the glass of the cruiser window and mouthed a single word. "Please." It was a plea for help, for forgiveness, for her to use her power to save him one last time. Ellsworth looked at him. She remembered the nights she had cried while he was out with Lydia. She remembered the insults, the mockery, the way he had made her feel small so he could feel big. She didn't look away, but she didn't smile either. There was no triumph in seeing him like this, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. She wasn't his savior anymore. She wasn't his victim. She was just a stranger watching a criminal go to jail. "Tell the DA I'm willing to cooperate," Ellsworth said to Lucas, turning her back on the police lights. "But no deals. He does the time." She walked back toward the SUV, leaving the noise and the chaos behind her. The storm clouds above finally broke, and a light rain began to fall, washing the grime from the tarmac, cleaning the slate. What a ride. Ellsworth went from being mocked in a courtroom to taking down two of the biggest corrupt titans in the city. It just goes to show that you should never underestimate someone just because they stay silent. Sometimes they're just waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and sweet revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Palmer's betrayal? Did he deserve a harsher punishment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.